Okay. And I just need to record. So, wait. Okay. Just a second for the recording. Vicky, I'm going to pause and start again, and you need to start again. Okay, just a second. So, hello and welcome, everybody. I'm very, very happy, and I feel very privileged, actually, to have this opportunity. The purpose of this meeting is to present the approach of acceptance and commitment therapy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a general overview. And I've chosen to call it Liberating Dialogues, because I think that's maybe the best description of what I'm trying to do. So I think the first thing that we enter this field of therapy or of mental suffering in general, what we encounter is the concept or the idea of suffering as a pathology. We are so used to think about human suffering through this lens that it's transparent to us. And I would like to start this webinar by presenting to you a very nice, a very beautiful concept from acceptance and commitment therapy that is called the happiness trap. The happiness trap is a trap that we are all captured in. We are all already inside the hold of the happiness trap. And the happiness trap, the best way to think about the happiness trap is to think about social media. I think this is where this gets the clearest. Think about the last time you went into your Instagram or Facebook or whatever, TikTok, whatever social platform that you're using, and you have seen a series of pictures of people presenting their successes, their vacations, even their sad and difficult moments are presented there within a certain framework. And when we are looking at this content, usually we start to feel, oh, I'm anxious, I'm lonely, I'm having rumination. We will speak about our thoughts in a moment. Something is wrong about me. Everybody here looks happy. Everybody here looks fine. Something is probably wrong with me because I don't feel this way. But actually, as a person that is treating clients and supervising and seeing hundreds and hundreds of cases, and also I was teaching mindfulness I am still teaching mindfulness for hundreds of individuals. When we get closer to the experience, and this is what we are actually going to try to do today, when we are pausing and really willing to come in contact with our experience as it is, we find that the human existence is entangled and is integrated with suffering. There is no way around it. It's already 2,500 years ago. We had a friend. His name is Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, sometimes they call him. And he already said that being human, being in a human form, has suffering within it as a natural fact. We are born, for all of those here who gave birth, we are born with a lot of suffering. It's also a lot of joy, but it's also a lot of suffering. We are aging, and that's a lot of suffering to age. We get sick. And that's not something sexy or beautiful. And we all are going to die. And we know this. It's something that we know. We have this awareness within us. So the happiness trap is this kind of social consensus that we are all walking around showing a mask, a facade, something that it doesn't let us connect to each other on the deeper level. And that's constantly being aided and exaggerated by the most common normal view of psychotherapy that constantly is searching to label and diagnose mental suffering as disease, something that shouldn't be this way. So depression is a disease, and anxiety is a disease, and everything is a disorder. And they've made a whole book, you know, full of these criteria and labeling and diagnosis that, by the way, already in 2013, which is 12 years ago, this book, The Bible of Psychiatry, the DSM-5, was already declared by the National Institute of Health in United States, which is not some kind of a conspiracy, but it's like the most mainstream scientific body in the United States, said that the DSM is not scientifically valid because human suffering doesn't behave like a biological disease. It doesn't function this way. And so the happiness trap is this kind of loop, is this kind of agujero, is this kind of hole to which we are falling constantly by turning against our own suffering. Instead of being willing to accept and meet our suffering as part of life, we start struggling with it, pushing it away, saying to ourselves, you have a mental disorder, you need to take medications, something is wrong with you. And then we start building around our suffering layers of shame and guilt. These are two forces that in our society constantly work to keep us isolated, to keep us separated, to keep us in conflict with our own suffering. And this is exactly what the liberating dialogue wishes to dismantle, disintegrate, melt away. So I'm going to share my screen with you just for a moment and show you the basic, beautiful, and very effective and very loved model of acceptance and commitment therapy, which is called the Hexagon of psychological flexibility. Because it's a theoretical model, it's an idea, it's a concept. This is not the truth. Okay? This is a kind of way to look at things which is constantly in a process of development, of change. The community that formulated this theory is a community that constantly thinks and researches and develops the thing, and at no point we are reaching an end and saying this is the model because it's written in our books and this is the truth. No, this is not the way in contextual behaviorist approaches, which is where acceptance and commitment comes from. This is not the way we think. We are not trying to reach the final truth. We are trying to offer a workable framework so that we can look at our own experience and start changing the things that we want to change. And this is very important because this is not an approach that is about, oh, I'm so much more aware now. I've spent 5 years in therapy and now I'm so aware of why my problems are like that. We are not aiming for that. It's great to be aware. And that's the starting point of most change processes. But our focus is on behavior and actual change, not on the content of your mind. And that's a very, very big distinction. I want to invite you, by the way, at any point, if you have questions, you can write them on the chat so that we will not lose the questions. In the end of the webinar, we will have time for question and answers. So the model of the liberating dialogue, the model of acceptance and commitment therapy, starts with being present. Starts with what many of you for sure heard about as mindfulness. And to clarify just a little bit, what are we talking about? I want to offer you a little exercise. Okay? So the exercise goes like this. The first thing we are going to do is to close our eyes and to take 7 deep breaths. And as we are doing this breathing, we will try to connect and ask ourselves, what is the experience right now on 3 levels? What is my bodily experience? What do I physically experience? What is the emotional experience? And what is the cognitive layer? What are the thoughts that I'm having right now? Taking one more deep breath, making sure we pay attention to the 3 layers: body, emotions, and thoughts. And then I want you to open your eyes, go out of your chair, and for 1 minute, just jump and shake and dance and move your body and really let it all out. When you are ready, you're welcome to come back. Close your eyes and go back to the 3 levels: body, emotions, thoughts. And if you feel like, you can write in the chat if there was any kind of change before and after you moved your body, whether it changed anything on the physical, emotional, or thought content level. So this is really, really important because when we think about psychotherapy in general, and approaches to change, usually we have this kind of focus on the content of the stories that our mind is telling us. When we imagine the process of therapy, it's always like, I'm going to tell you about my past, and then we will understand through this story. And this is all very good and has its place, but acceptance and commitment therapy and the idea of psychological flexibility starts from an absolutely different point. And the point that it starts from is the point of contact with the actual experience in the present moment. So the contact is not just with the content of the stories of our minds. The content of the stories of our mind is a small part of the experience we actually have as humans. But remember, we have the happiness trap, we have the context in which we are living, we have the influence of our society. And so many of us, if I would even dare say most of us, most of the time, we are imprisoned in a prison of repetition that is made out of the content of the stories that our mind is telling us. And we are so caught up in this prison, we are so crippled by this prison that most of us, most of the time, we are not even able to see that we are imprisoned. So the first step of the liberating dialogue is coming into contact with the actual experience in the present moment. So the basic thing, or the basic ability that a person that wants to hold a liberating dialogue with another human being needs to have is the ability of mindfulness. Because if I don't know what I'm feeling, how is my body, if I am not trained and I don't have the ability to track my emotional movements, the way my thought starts to run, if I'm not skilled in mindfulness, there is no way I could help another human being acquire this skill. And so the basic training of acceptance and commitment therapy always is coming back to mindfulness. And mindfulness, please, don't make this mistake to think that mindfulness is sitting closed eyes, crossed legs, and meditating for hours. This is one way to cultivate mindfulness. It may be valuable, it may be important, but definitely not the only way, or sometimes even not the best way if we want to engage in a liberating dialogue. Because believe me, after I sat a 4-month retreat in silent, 12 hours each day, and then I came back home to talk to my mom. Now, this was the challenge of mindfulness. Yeah. So I think this developing the ability to actually be mindful throughout an interaction is a different way, is a different thing that we cultivate, and it's really necessary, it's really required. Okay, so here in the Hexaflex, being present represents this facet, this ability of mindfulness. And I want to go forward and speak to you a little bit about acceptance. Acceptance is a very, very precious and yet very difficult quality to cultivate. I'm going to stop the share for a second. Okay. And I want you to connect to this idea, okay, or connect to this ability or this axis of acceptance and avoidance through an actual experimental research within your own self. So please try to think about something. It can be a bodily sensation, it can be an emotion, or it can be a pattern of thought. Any of these things, any of the levels. And think about a certain experience within one of these three dimensions that is absolutely unbearable for you. That you would do like a whole lot in order not to experience. So I think for most people, that's not so hard to find. If we think a little bit, we say, okay, a sensation of being vulnerable to others. Or another person would say, for me, it's the feeling of my heart beating really fast and strong. I cannot bear this. And another person would say, going with a bathing suit, you know? So it's like, it's so wide. And when we start to investigate and research what is actually the thing that we try to avoid, it's very helpful to go to the mindfulness part and say, okay, what on the actual experiential level is this sensation, emotion, or thought that I simply don't agree to experience? I once had a case of a woman that had sexual dreams about people who are not her partner. And this was like unbearable for her. She felt horrified. She couldn't tolerate, even in dreams, that her mind is producing this kind of content. So it really can be anything. Some people are avoiding jealousy. Some people are avoiding being seen and being valued. Other people, for example, for me, many years, I couldn't tolerate people complimenting me. It was unbearable sensation. I felt like, oh, I cannot take it, you know? So it can be anything. Think about your own thing. And if you identified this avoidance, let's say, field, okay, or focus, start looking around and ask yourself, what do I do? How do I behave, or how do I constrain myself? Or what things do I choose or choose not to do in order not to meet this particular physical sensation, emotion, or pattern of thought? What is the strategy of avoidance that I've developed around this thing? And already here, you can start to see how useful the lens of acceptance and commitment is. Because this very simple way of telling the story, or this lens or this perspective that we are putting on our behavior. So instead of thinking, I have this problem, this symptom, you know, I'm thinking, okay, there is something unbearable and I make a lot of effort to avoid it. Yeah. This very simple way of looking at our behavior can take us a whole long way. Because if we look at addiction, for example, most addictions are intent to avoid something that is so unbearable, something that is so painful, that the addiction actually is the solution and not the problem. Because the person who is addicted takes this choice one time, two times, and then it becomes a habitual pattern. It becomes something they turn to in order to avoid this unbearable feeling or sensation. We can even go to extremes like thinking of self-harm, self-inflicting harm. You know, I've worked a lot with cases of complex PTSD of people who were abused in their childhood. And in many of these cases, There was a whole psychological interpretation of why do they harm themselves. But when you actually go through the mindfulness lens and you ask the people, what's going on a minute before you cut yourself? What's the actual experience that you're having? Most of them would say, there was such a horrible nothingness that I prefer to feel the pain. I felt so dead inside that I had to do something not to feel this deadly feeling. And so the lens of avoidance can take us from the most daily, usual choices that we are making, like not going on dates, or not changing a dish in a restaurant, or not arguing with our partner, or whatever it is. And it can take us to the most extreme cases of suffering, and still the mechanism is something that we can relate to. Is something that we can find our common humanity, something that we can find and say, you know, I totally understand. I totally understand. Because maybe not the same magnitude, maybe not the same damage that I'm making, but I have avoidance mechanisms as well. Of course I do. When I'm sick, when I need somebody to take care of me, in my own personal case, this is a huge avoidance area in my life, to be taken care of, to be vulnerable, to be weak, to be like this thing. This is very hard for me. So I have avoidance mechanisms. I'm ignoring it when I'm sick many times. Is this a good thing? No. Is this conditioned thing? Yes. And this is where I feel it's so useful to use this lens. Because through thinking and seeing myself through the hexagon of psychological flexibility, I can actually relate to others in a very non-hierarchical, very dialogical, and a very liberating way. We can form these bonds that makes us really close. We can form these bonds in which there is trust. I'm not putting you in another category. Oh, no, you are sick, you have a mental disorder, and I'm healthy. This doesn't exist in the world of contextual behaviorism. We all have conditioned patterns that we learned. We learned it not just from our father and mother. Thank you, traditional psychology. Father and mother are very important, but they are really not all that there is in our process of conditioning. School is conditioning us. Our friends are conditioning us. The films and series that we are watching are conditioning us. The advertisement that we are constantly bombed by, they are conditioning us. Every woman that look in the mirror knows this. We are not just conditioned by our mother and father. We are conditioned by all of our interactions with our environment. And this conditioned behavior is what we are meeting day in and day out. This conditioned behavior is what we are meeting in our nervous system. Our nervous system is conditioned to respond in certain ways. This is what we are meeting on our emotional level. We are conditioned by so many factors in our environment, in our past, and also in our daily, right now, daily lives. Our emotional reactions, our emotional patterns are constantly conditioned by this interaction between us and the context we are living in. And it's the same with our thoughts. And here we are arriving at the second process. It's like a crash course on the hexaflex. So I will go back to the painting of the hexaflex. So now we're going to a very, very important and beautiful part of the hexaflex, which is called cognitive diffusion. Cognitive diffusion and the axis of cognitive diffusion versus cognitive fusion is actually the way acceptance and commitment therapy describes our relationship with our thoughts. So again, I'm stopping the share for a second. So most of us, most of the time, we think that our thoughts are a reflection of the reality. We are so entangled with the stories that our thoughts are telling us. We are so used to listen to this voice inside our head telling us it's going to be really bad if you will not be worried, if you will not take more action, a catastrophe is going to happen. You need to prepare yourself, in the case of people who tend to worry, so they have this worrying voice that constantly disturbs them. You need to do that. You haven't done that. This is irresponsible. Or for example, in the example of people with a depressive orientation or a depressive pattern of thoughts, they have this triad of the self, the world, and the future, and they constantly think negative things about themselves, the world in general, and the future. But they don't see it as a habit. They cannot say to you, yeah, I have this depressive habits of thinking. No, when they arrive to say this, we are in a very good place. This is where I'm saying as a therapist, yay, I made it. Once they are recognizing and saying, I'm hearing the voice of depression. Yeah, this is cognitive diffusion. Looking at your thoughts instead of looking through your thoughts. There is a beautiful exercise that we can do now. You can take your hands and put them like that. And then you can bring them closer to your eyes, like this. And then you can look around. Look around the room and look around in the Zoom and really take a moment and kind of get used to the fact that you have this thing on your on your eyes. And really appreciate how it feels when you have this thing on your eyes, And then, very slowly, we can start distancing the hands from the eyes. And looking at the hands, and then looking around. The hands are still there, but you can look around and see the room and see the Zoom and see the hands. The hands haven't gone anywhere, but you can kind of peek above, below, on the sides, This is the process of cognitive diffusion, exactly. We take something that is fused to us. We take something that we are completely identified with, that we cannot see as a conditioned behavior. We cannot see our thoughts as a conditioned behavior in the beginning when we start to practice. But through the liberating dialogue, we start to acknowledge and see that our thoughts are verbal behaviors, internal behaviors that we actually acquired, we internalized. We learn somehow from somebody to say this kind of things. I'm a failure. I'm worthless. I will never succeed. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me. This world sucks. We learned these things, again, sometimes from our parents, thank you. Sometimes from our siblings, sometimes from many generations. It's not just our parents. We have ancestors, and these ancestors, they carry with them messages, paradigms, concepts. We are all carrying within us this weight, this burden of our ancestors and their messages about the world, about the others, about the body, about sexuality, about gender. And until we don't start to diffuse from the content of the thoughts, it's very hard to evaluate how this conditioned behavior is affecting our lives. Only when we start seeing thoughts as thoughts, passing mental events, only then can we start really getting to know the chains that makes the prison of repetition. Only then we can say, okay, when this voice comes into my head and say to me, you are fat, it has implications. It has bodily responses. It has emotional responses. It has behavioral responses. And until I cannot see this as a mental event that I learned somewhere, as a solution, as an attempt to survive, I cannot relate to it in a useful way. I've brought you a nice illustration about that. Just a second. So, an illustration about cognitive diffusion that shows the three stages. So, first of all, she's under the cloud, and the cloud is really like affecting her completely. And then she starts relating to the cloud of the thoughts. First of all, she's doing this movement of like, hey, you are a cloud. There is something going on. I recognize you. I don't just passively is impacted by you. I'm starting to relate. I'm starting to be active in my orientation towards my inner content of thoughts. And then the third one, this is like why I liked a lot this specific painting, is the place where compassion comes in. And it's the place where reconciliation comes in. It's the place where, in order to do change processes, we have to have a lot of patience and compassion towards ourselves and towards the way we have been conditioned to suffer, conditioned to think certain things. Okay, so we had being present, which is mindfulness. We touched on acceptance and experiential avoidance in a moment. And we spoke about cognitive fusion and diffusion very briefly. Each one of these things can be a seminar of 5 or 6 or 12 meetings, they all have techniques and really profound ways that we can work with them within the process. But I chose today just to give you a glance, just to give you a feeling of how it is when we work through this lens of acceptance and commitment therapy. So the next thing I want to talk about is values. I will stop the share again. And this is, I think, again, where acceptance and commitment really offers us, really brings us something radical. Because it doesn't just stop with identifying the problem. It's not about just be aware, just like I started. Being aware is our point of entry. This is like the first step. So in good liberating dialogues, we spend a lot of time exploring, getting to know, getting closer, getting intimate with what is, with how experience is actually taking place, and with the patterns that make your prison of repetition. We have to get really familiar with that. And even more than familiar, when suffering is strong, part of the thing we really need through this experimenting, through this intimate being with that together and not alone, not with shame, not with guilt, with this friendly, shared humanity, compassionate approach that says, we're on the same boat. We are seriously on the same boat. We are both human, trying to make the best we can, and let's look at your suffering through this lens. Something that happens naturally when we spend this time together in a dialogue, in a liberating dialogue like that, is that we get fed up. We need to be really fed up with our prison. And that takes time. We need to reach the point in which we say, I need to change. I'm yearning for change. It cannot come from any external authority. And this is why I think and believe that so many of the processes of psychotherapy, they fail so radically. And this is also why I think the whole promise of psychedelic therapy is wrong. Because there is this expectation from an external force, whether it's the therapist or a molecule or a shaman or a magician or somebody who is outside yourself, that will come and he will do the magic and you will change. Acceptance and commitment therapy works in different way. It brings the keys to your life and says, hey, dude, you know, you're going to die and it's going to happen much sooner than you expect. Here are the keys. Drive the car. This takes time. This takes time because many of us, many, if not most of us, we have developed within a very sick society. We have developed within a society that doesn't support our well-being, doesn't support our healthy relationship with our body, our sexuality, our needs. Many of us have developed in families where we experienced different levels of violence or emotional violence or neglect. Many of us have gone through systems that oppressed us, that narrowed our flexibility to be and move and be vulnerable and really choose what we want and how we want to live our lives. It takes time. It takes time. It really takes time. And we need to have, for the liberating dialogue, we need to have patience. We cannot come with this agenda of like, change now. No, we need to have patience, deep patience. We need to, ourselves, we need to practice acceptance in a very profound way so that we can go hand in hand with another human being who is struggling right now with the prison of repetition. But what we are constantly holding on to is that every person on this planet has within them the ability and the yearning to recognize their deep values. And when I say values, I don't mean this generic new age things about like, you need to be whatever, compassionate. No, I don't. Recognizing your values is a skill. It's a kind of a question that we learn how to ask. And the basic question of values ask, what is the quality that I want to cultivate through my behavior? What is the quality that I want to cultivate through my behavior? If it's not a quality, if it's a goal, if it's something that you can achieve or not achieve, if it's $1 million or a wedding ring or being the CEO, these are not values. Values are internal qualities of the human being, and there is no end answer. It's not like, okay, I know my values and then they stay like this for the entire life. No, values are something that keeps on changing, just like we keep on changing all the time. So the thing that is really important is learning how to ask the question, because the answers, they're going to change constantly. And we need to refine more and more our ability to listen to this inner compass. For this also, I brought you a sweet illustration. Because most of us, we are going in our lives with no values. We have no idea what it even means to have values. We are following other people's ideas of how we're supposed to be. We are following just not knowing, confusion or mindlessness, distraction. Choosing day in and day out, hour after hour, as a parent, as a partner, as a citizen, as a human being, choosing what I do, the actions, the actual actions that are making my day. This is where ACT puts lots of the emphasis. How can we start to design a routine, a daily life, but also in the more general sense, a direction in life that will be in accordance with our values? And my example is always that if we are trained in value orientation and value-oriented actions, we are ending the day with this feeling of like, way to go, Galia, you did good. And maybe the day was horrible. And my kid annoyed me and we had a fight, and my partner annoyed me and we had a fight. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I had a perfect day or that I did everything good. You remember the happiness trap? It means that I was in the fight and I kept my values, because I kept the assertiveness and the patience that I wanted. And I didn't burst into screaming like maybe I would have been doing 8 years ago when my kid was 2 years old. Yeah. But I have much more regulation capacities right now because I worked on my values as a mother. Because one of my values as a mother is to know how to be in a conflict, but not lose my mind. This is a quality that I'm personally developing and working hard to get. I don't always succeed. Values are not something that we can always succeed in. It's not working like that. Okay, I see that our time is almost finished, so I will leave the other two processes, which is committed action, which is how to translate the values into actual action in life, and self as context, which is kind of wrapping the thing in general. And maybe I just make a small little comment about self as context. Self as context is the way acceptance and commitment views the self. So self as context is a paradigm or an alternative to our concept that there is a self that is permanent and separate from other things. In acceptance and commitment, we don't see the self as something like that. In acceptance and commitment, we believe and we work through the concept and the idea that the self is a process of constant change, and that every person, regardless of where he starts or she starts from, can make incredible changes in their lives, in their mind, in their heart, in their spirit, and can transform. And so acceptance and commitment therapy rejects completely the idea of personality. There are no personality disorders. This is a fiction. It doesn't exist. People have patterns. Many of them are very deep and very hard to change. Patterns of attachment, patterns of their neurological system, patterns of their gender, their culture, their history, their traumas. But these are all patterns. And this is very much aligned with what I personally have learned, not only as a therapist and supervisor, but also as a Buddhist practitioner and a practitioner of the ancient ways of psychedelics. Because the transformations that you see in people when you are willing to go hand in hand in this journey are so incredible, are so huge. I personally have accompanied people that told me, I have been depressed my entire life since I was 7 years old. And now, 12 years after we ended our process, this person keeps on sending me this New Year's greetings, telling me about how beautiful his life is with his family. This is, for me, a living truth. It's not something I need to think about. I know that the self doesn't exist, that this invention of Western psychology is harmful and dangerous for people because it doesn't allow them the hope, because it doesn't allow them the horizon of transformation. This is why approaches like the recovery approach of Pat Ogden and other approaches that I work with are so important for me as an activist, not only in mental health, but in our society at large. Showing this horizon and really, really helping people see their potential to transform is, for me, really the essence of the liberating dialogue. The liberating dialogue eventually is liberating you from yourself and brings you in contact with the universe, with the infinite, with that is always true. Not everybody wants to get there. And it costs sometimes a very high price, but it's there. And we need to remind it to ourselves many times when we get lost in the prison of repetition. And this is why we need to be here for each other. Okay, we have some time for a question. Let's see if we have anything on the chat. Let me see. Okay, so okay, any questions from you? Anyone who wants to have a question like live? I would love to answer anything. Okay, so for sure, anyone other than psychedelics? Okay, so I want to briefly talk about our coming intensive in Barcelona. So this webinar is the first step of a series of events that we're going to have. The next thing is an online course, which is 3 meetings. Each of the meetings are an hour and a half long, in which we're going to dive deeply in each of these subjects and open it up and really acquire skills and practice and learn. And I really am very excited to do this online course. It's also going to be in Spanish and English parallel, so feel very, very welcome to join. And we have few last spots for our 3 days intensive training in Barcelona that is going to happen in the first weekend of April. Everything we are going to send you also by mail so that you can see all the details and everything. But this 3 days of intensive is really, I think it's really going to be fun, because Zoom is so limited, especially to do exercises and work like we do in acceptance and commitment therapy. And the intensive in Barcelona would be really like a laboratory to play, and I'm coming from many different orientation. So I have the yoga and the meditation and the movement and the vocal work, and we're going to use all of these tools in order to really tackle these various processes that we're talking about. So we are going to have the theoretical part, which mostly is going to be online, but then we are going to really do the work, do the experiential, the physical, the emotional work together. And already we have a lovely group of people from all over the world, and I'm very excited and happy about that. And you're very, very, very welcome to join. So unless anyone has any question, or Vicky, if you wanna, maybe do you want to add something about? No, okay. Anyone, before we end the webinar, anyone has any more questions, wants to comment anything, you're really, really welcome. Thank you very much. I wish you all a very beautiful evening. And with every question or comment that you may have, you are very, very welcome to turn to us, to write to us, to our email, and we'll be happy to answer. Thank you.